Welcome back to On the Same Page. We are on Daf Chaf Tes Amud Aleph, 29a of Masechus Kiddushin. We are starting 2 lines from the bottom of the page. We've been learning about some of the obligations, the chiyuvim, that a father has with regards to mitzvos related to his son, his children. And we were talking last about Pidyon Haben, the redemption of the firstborn, that the father has to redeem the firstborn son by giving 5 selah to a Kohen. Says the Gemara, 2 lines from the bottom, Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, Hu liftos ubino liftos. What if a person is a bechar, he's a firstborn, he grows up, and his father never redeemed him? And so he needs to redeem himself. But he also now has a firstborn son that he needs to redeem. So who takes precedence? Who should he redeem first? So the Gemara says, the Brisa says, Hu kodem livno. He comes before his son. He should redeem himself before he redeems his son. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Rabbi Yehuda says, Bino kodmo. No, his son comes first. Why? Shezeh mitzvas ha'aviv, v'zeh mitzvas bino alav. Because really, says Rabbi Yehuda, he himself, whose mitzvah is it to redeem him? He's a firstborn son. It really was his father's mitzvah. His father didn't do it, so he has to do it himself. But it's really his father's mitzvah. V'zeh mitzvahs b'no Allah. But with regards to his son, so that mitzvah is actually his mitzvah. So Rabbi Yehuda thinks that he should redeem his son before he redeems himself because his son is really his mitzvah, while himself is really his father's mitzvah. The first opinion, though, said that he comes first. That he comes before his son. Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah, says Rabbi Yirmiyah that really Hakol Moding, everybody agrees, both opinions agree, top of the next page, that Kol Hecha Deleka El Chamesh Slayim, that if a guy only has 5 selah, meaning I suppose that discussion maybe would be precedence of who you should redeem first. The first opinion said he should redeem himself first. Second opinion said he should redeem his son first. But everybody agrees that if he only has a choice to redeem one or the other, because he only has 5 selah, hu kodem livno, that he takes precedence over his son. My time, what's the reason? Mitzvah de gufei adifa. A mitzvah on his own body is more important. So, says Rabbi Yirmiyah, if a person only has 5 selah and it's a choice between his son or himself, everybody will agree that he should redeem himself. Why? Because that's a mitzvah on his own body, and that is more significant. Ki pligi, where would they argue? Heicha de'ika chamesh mishubadim v'chamesh b'nei chavrim. They would argue in the following scenario, where he has 5 selah in his possession, that's b'nei chavrim, free, and 5 that are mishubadim, that have a lien on them, and they are currently in the possession of somebody else. So the question would be as follows. Basically, a guy had something worth 5 selah, or a field, let's say, and 5 selah is much less than a field, but let's say he sold a field, and amongst the value of that field, within the value of that field is 5 selah. So there's a lien on that property for previous obligations. So it's possible that since he already had an obligation to redeem himself when he sold the property, and that means he had an obligation to give 5 selah to the Kohen, that 5 selah has a lien on it. So when he now goes and sells his field to somebody else, the Kohen says, wait, but there's 5 selah that this man owes me, there would be a lien on that field for that 5 selah. So it's possible that the Kohen should now be able to go and collect his 5 selah from whoever bought the field. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Yehuda Savar, Rabbi Yehuda held, Rabbi Yehuda who said that the son comes before the father, that he should redeem the son. So what did he really mean? Rabbi Yirmiyah is saying, he really meant as follows, that we're talking about a scenario where there are he has 5 sela in his possession and 5 sela that he sold an object and there's a lien on it. So Rabbi Yehuda holds that milva dechsiv b'Torah k'ksuva b'shtar damya. A loan in the Torah, or really other obligations as well. In this case, it's not exactly a loan, it's an obligation to pay the Kohen, 5 sela. So the question is there a lien on that? Meaning, can you go and now, can the Kohen, does he have a right to collect it from Mishubadim, from property that has a lien on it? So Rabbi Yehuda says that yes, because an obligation, a Torah obligation, is like kiksuva b'shtar damya, is like it's a loan that's written in a shtar. You see, if a person lends money, then they, or really actually, if a person borrows money, they now owe. So if a person now owes money, so they have property. Is there a lien on their property? If they would go and sell it, could the creditor go and collect from that property? So it depends. If the halva, if the loan was written down in a shtar, in a document, then yes. If there's a contract that goes with the loan, then there's a lien on the property. The creditor is allowed to go and collect from the property. The buyer of the property sort of should have known about it, because there's a contract, it's public knowledge, then there's a lien, the creditor is allowed to collect the field. However, if it's a milval pet, it's an oral loan, there's no contract, there's no record of it, how can we expect a buyer to know about it? So since we can't expect him to know about it, then it's not fair to him to allow creditors to go and collect his field that he just bought. So the creditors are not allowed to collect it. There's no lien on the field. So that's, within a loan, it depends. If it's a written loan, there's a contract, there's a lien on the property. If there's not, then, if there's no contract, it's not written, there's no lien. So what's the story if we're not talking about a loan, we're talking about an obligation that's a Torah obligation, where the person who never experienced a pidyon haben, he never was redeemed, the Kohen has a right to his 5 sela. There's an obligation to pay the Kohen 5 sela. Will a lien, if he now sells property, will there be a lien on that property? So Rabbi Yehuda says yes. Rabbi Yehuda says, milve dechsiv b'Torah, a loan in the Torah, or an obligation that's created by the Torah, in this case the obligation of 5 sela to the Kohen, is kiksuva b'shtar damya. We relate to it like a written loan, and therefore there's a lien on the property, and therefore the Kohen has a right to go and collect from the liened property. So therefore Rabbi Yehuda says that behani chamesh parak livrei, the 5 sela that he has in his possession, he should use to redeem his son. Because there's no lien on the redemption of the son. We're assuming that we're talking about a piece of a property that was sold before he had the baby. So at the moment that property was sold, with regards to the obligation to redeem himself, that obligation already exists. So there's a lien created on the property that the Kohen's allowed to go and collect the sold property for the individual's own redemption, which already exists at the time that he sells the property, because his father never redeemed him. But then he goes and has his firstborn son. Well, the property that he sold last week, or last month, or last year has no lien on it for a baby, an obligation that's created later. So with regards to the lien, with regards to the obligation to redeem his son, there's no lien on the property. So where's the Kohen going to get his money from? He should get it from the 5 sela that's liquid right now, that the person has. We said the individual has 5 of his own sela, liquid cash, liquid assets, and he has 5 sela that he sold. So the Kohen, with regards to the redemption of the firstborn son of this individual, the Kohen should get it from the liquid assets, from the 5 sela that the man owns. Bahani chamesh parak livrei. The azil Kohen, and then, meaning the individual should redeem his firstborn son with the 5 sela that he has. The azil Kohen, and then the Kohen should go v'tarif le'lechamish mishubadim l'dideh. He should collect the 5 sela from the property that has a lien on it for the person's own redemption. So that's why Rabbi Yehuda said that you redeem the son first and then the father, because you actually could get both. You could get both done because you're able to redeem the father from the mishubadin, from the property that has a lien. However, the Rabbaran, the first opinion of the Brisa, who said that he only redeems himself, Rabbaran Savri, they hold milva d'chsib ba'araiso lav kiksuva b'shtar damya, that a obligation that's written in the Torah, that's not enough to say that it's like it's written in a document, and therefore we don't treat it like a written loan, we treat it like an oral loan. There's no lien on any property that was sold. A creditor has no right to go and collect from lekuchos, from buyers. Therefore, even with regards to the pidyon haben of himself, his own individual redemption, even though that was a pre-existing obligation, when he sold property, no lien was created on that property. The Kohen has no right to go and get it. So there's only 5 sela in play here. The 5 sela that he has. The 5 sela that's in the lien is not in play. Therefore, the Rabbanan say that the individual himself takes precedence. Hilkoch mitzvah dugufei adif. Therefore, the mitzvah upon himself takes precedence. So the way Rabbi Yirmiyah is explaining the brisa that we started with, the bottom of the previous page, the brisa said if he has enough to redeem himself, or to only redeem one of them, who should he redeem? So the Rabbi Yirmiyah is saying, really, I guess he's saying that if he had enough to redeem both, then he'll redeem both. The order, they're not discussing that, probably himself first, because it's, again, mitzvah de gufei, it's an obligation on himself. That's not what they're talking about there. The Bryce is talking about where he has 5 sela cash, liquid, his 5 sela in a property that he sold, that maybe has a lien, maybe doesn't. Rabbi Yehuda said, he was the second opinion in the Bryce, so Rabbi Yehuda said that you're supposed to redeem the son. Why? Because he can what he means is use the cash to redeem the son, and then the Kohen can also go and collect from the lien property for the individual himself, which already had an obligation, and therefore the lien applies to. Because Rabbi Yehuda holds that obligations in the Torah create a lien, like a milva bishtar, like a loan that was done with a document. And the Rabbanan, who said no, he should redeem himself, they hold that's because he can't redeem himself from his sold property. There's no lien on this obligation. Therefore, he only has 5 sela to work with, and his own redemption should come first because it's a mitzvah de gufei, it's a mitzvah on his own body. Okay. So now that we've entered this discussion of what takes precedence, so the Gemara is going to continue along those lines, and it says as follows: Tanu Rabban, the rabbis taught. We are about 10 lines down or so, 9 or 10 lines down. Tanu Rabban, the rabbis taught. Liftos espino v'lalos l'regel. Let's say he has a choice to either redeem himself, or he can use the money in order to be ola l'regel, to fulfill the mitzvah of making a pilgrimage to Yerushalayim for one of the shalosh regalim, for one of the holidays, Sukkot, Pesach, or Shavuos. So what should he use the money for? It's 5 sela for a ticket to Yerushalayim, or he could use it to redeem his son. What should he use it for? Says the Brisa, Podes beno v'acharkach ola l'regel. He should redeem his son, and then that takes precedence over being ola l'regel, over making the pilgrimage to Yerushalayim. Rabbi Yehuda says, no, ola l'regel v'acharkach podes beno. Aliyah l'regel takes precedence. Visiting Yerushalayim for the Yom Tif takes precedence over pidyon haben. Why? Shezu mitzvah overes, v'zu mitzvah she'ena overes. Says Rabbi Yehuda, because this is a passing mitzvah and this is not a passing mitzvah. Meaning, aliyah l'regel is time bound. You got to do it during the holiday. So if you have the money, you should do it now. Pidyon haben, you're supposed to do it after 30 days, but if you don't, you still have a chance to do it after that. So let him go to Yerushalayim for the regel, and when he gets another 5 sela, he'll redeem his firstborn son. That's the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. Says the Gemara, Bishlam Rabbi Yehuda Kedika Amar Taima. Granted, I understand Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. He explained his reason. Because Aliyah L'Regel is a passing mitzvah, therefore it takes precedence. Ela Rabbanan Mai Taimayu. But what is the reasoning of the Rabbanan? Why do they say that Pidyon Ben takes precedence over being Ola L'Regel? Says the Gemara to Amar Kra, because the pasuk says, Kol Bechor Banecha Tifteh. It says, it's actually in the same verse, it speaks about Pidyon Ben and Aliyah L'Regel. In, I believe this is Parshas Mishpatim. It says, Kol Bechor Banecha Tifteh. All of your firstborns you should redeem. Actually, it may be Parshas Kisisa. I'm not sure. Lamed sounds like Kisisa, actually. It says, Kol Bechor Banecha Tifteh. All your firstborn sons you should redeem. The Hadar, and then it says, Lo Yira'u Fanai Rekam. You should not see my face empty, meaning talking about being Ola L'Regel and bringing a carbon there. Don't come empty-handed. But it's the same verse. It says in that pasuk, in Shemos Lamed Daled, that you should redeem your firstborn. Kol Bechor Banecha Tifteh, V'lo Yira'u Fanai Rekam. And don't see my face empty-handed. So we see that, which is talking about being Ola L'Regel, we see that Pidyon Ben takes precedence, comes first in the pasuk and takes precedence, therefore, over being Ola L'Regel. That's the reasoning of the Rabbanan. That's why they say redeeming your first son comes first. Your firstborn son comes first. Tana Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, Minayin shim hayu lo chamisha banim mechamesh nashim shechayev liftos kulan. From where do we know that if a person has 5 sons from 5 different wives, he has to redeem all of them? Meaning it doesn't go by his firstborn, it goes by her firstborn. Talmud Lomar, the pasuk says, Kol Bechor Banecha Tifteh. It says you should redeem all the firstborn sons. Kol Bechor Banecha, all your firstborn sons. Says the Gemara, Pshita, that's obvious. Bepete Rechem Tala Rachmana. The Torah made it dependent on the one who opens the womb. The pasuk says, does anyone quote it here? I don't remember the pasuk offhand, but the pasuk the verse uses the words in Parshas Bo actually and says that the Peterechem, the one who opens the womb. So it seems it's the firstborn son. It's and that's what it's dependent on. So why do I need to say Kol Bechor Banecha redeem all your firstborns to teach me that if a person has 5 wives, he redeems all 5 firstborn sons? You should just learn it, because it's dependent on whoever opens the womb. So whoever her first son, if a woman has a firstborn son, that's who should receive Pidyon Ben. Gemara says, Ma'u detema. What might I have said? Neilef Bechor Bechor Minachla. I might have thought to learn from inheritance law. It says Bechor, it says a firstborn with regards to Pidyon Ben, redeeming your firstborn. It says Bechor with regards to inheritance, that the Bechor, the firstborn, gets double portion. Mala Hala and Reishis Ono. Just like when it comes to the Bechor of inheritance, it's the first of his seed, it's the first of his strength, the firstborn of the father. Afkan Reishis Ono. I might have said here also it's Reishis Ono, it's the first of his strength, it's the first that comes from the father. And yes, it may be dependent on Peterechem, the one who opens the womb, but maybe that means only his first child, his first wife. So the one who opened the womb for his first wife, which is his firstborn, maybe that's who gets Pidyon Ben, but his second wife, his third wife, no. Kamash Malan, that's why the pasuk comes to tell me, Kol Bechor Banecha Tifteh, all your Bechors, all of your firstborns you have to redeem, not just your own firstborn, but your firstborn from wife number 1, from wife number 2, from wife number 3, etc. Okay, now we also learned in the Brisa that a father is obligated to lilamdo Torah, to teach his son Torah. Minalan, how do we know a father has to teach his son Torah? Dichsev, because the pasuk says, "V'limadatem osam es b'nechem." It says, and you shall teach these words, you should teach the Torah to your sons. And if his father doesn't teach him, he has to learn himself. A person also has an obligation on their own to learn Torah. Tichsiv, as the pasuk says, ulamadatem, and you shall learn. It's a different pasuk. The pasuk says, Moshe says to the people, he says, listen, Israel, to all of the laws and the statutes that I am speaking in your ears today, ulamadatem osam, and you should learn them. Ushmartem lasosam, and you should guard them. So we see there's a mitzvah to learn them on your own. So ask the Gemara, Ihi minalan dulo machayva, how do we know that a mother is not obligated to teach her son? Because that's what the Mishnah had said, that in the Brisa, that there's obligations that are on the father that are not on the mother. So a father has an obligation to teach his son Torah, but the mother doesn't. How do we know that she doesn't have an obligation? Tichsiv, because the pasuk says, V'limadatem, it says, and you shall teach, but it can also be read, it's not written actually with the yud, it's pronounced like that, V'limadatem, and you should teach, but it's also this other word, ulamatem, and you should learn. Kol shemitzuva lilmod, mitzuva lilamed. Whoever has an obligation to learn has an obligation to teach. V'chol she'ena mitzuva lilmod, ena mitzuva lilamed. And whoever does not have an obligation to learn is not obligated to teach. So a man who has an obligation to learn has an obligation to teach his son. A woman who has no obligation to learn Torah is not obligated to teach her son. V'ihi minalan dulo machayva, lemelach nafsha. How do we know a woman doesn't have to teach herself, to learn herself? Tichsiv, again, because it says, V'limadatem ulamadatem. The same drasha, V'limadatem ulamadatem. Kol she'acherim mitzuvin lilamdo, mitzuva lilmod. And we learn from this, again, this comparison of the word, and you shall teach, and you shall learn, that only someone who others are obligated to teach is obligated to learn, to teach themselves. And whoever is not obligated, that whoever others are not obligated to teach, is not obligated to teach themselves. And how do we know that a woman, that others are not required to teach her, that her father doesn't have to teach her? To Amar Kra, because the pasuk says, osam es, and you should teach them to your sons. And not to your daughters. So a father has an obligation to teach Torah to his sons, not to his daughters. And since there's no obligation for someone to teach her, there's no obligation for her to teach herself. And if there's no obligation to teach herself, there's also no obligation for her to teach others. That's how we arrive at the point that the Mishnah was making, that a mother does not have an obligation to teach her son, because since her father doesn't have an obligation to teach her, we learn out then that there's no obligation for someone else to teach them, doesn't have an obligation to teach themselves, and whoever doesn't have an obligation to teach themselves doesn't have an obligation to teach her son. Now, we should just mention, although a woman doesn't have a specific obligation to learn Torah, she does have an obligation to follow halacha and to live an ethical life, and so she's expected to learn whatever she needs in order to fulfill the mitzvos, keep halacha, and also live, according to proper musar, proper ethics. Okay. Says the Gemara, 3 lines down in the wider lines, towards the end of the line, it says, Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught. Hu lilmod uveno lilmod. Let's say there's an opportunity for either him to learn or his son to learn. Who comes first? Who kodem livno? He comes first. The person takes care of themselves first, in terms of at least this, that he makes sure that he learns before he makes sure that his son learns. Rabbi Yehuda says, Im beno zariz umemulach. If his son is very zealous in learning, umemulach, and he literally is salted, I think preserved. He preserves it, he holds on to it. There's another girsa here that would be mutzlach, he's successful. V'talmudo miskayim biyado, and he holds on to his learning, bino kodmo, then his son should come first. So a father generally who hasn't learned, it's, first and foremost he has to make sure that he learns before he makes sure that his son learns. However, if he has if his son is a Mitsuya, he's excellent, he can hold on to his learning, then he should put his son first. Kihadar of Yaakov, Breder of Acha bar Yaakov. Like we see this braga in the story involving Rav Yaakov, the son of Rav Acha bar Yaakov. So Shadri Avul Kamei de Abaye. Rav Acha sent his son Rav Yaakov to learn in the yeshiva of Abaye. Ki asa, when he came home for a vacation, Chazia de Lohav Mechadadan Shmaitze. His father Rav Acha saw that his son Yaakov was not the sharpest. So Amarle. So he said, if he's not this excellent student, then I come first. He said, Ana difno minach. I'm a better learner than you. Tuv at de'ezel ana. You should return, and I should go. Because there was only opportunity for one of them to go learn in the yeshiva. Maybe the other one had to mind the family business. So Rav Acha said, I take precedent. If you were excellent in learning, then you would. But he saw that his son was not excellent, and therefore he said, you stay here, and I will go. Shama Abaye Dikaba Asi. Abaye heard that the great Rav Acha was coming to his yeshiva. Habahu mazik be Rabbanan de Abaye Diki Habu Aili betrain Afiu Biyamama Habu Mitziki. There was a certain mazik, a demon of some sort, that was hanging around the Beis Medrash, the study hall of Abaye, and it was such a dangerous demon that even if they would come, the students would come in pairs. And even in the daytime, it would hurt them. So, I don't know exactly how it hurt them, but usually, if you come as a group, you come in pairs, that should be protection. You come in the daytime, it should be protection against the demons. Nothing was helping. But when Abaye heard that Rav Acha was coming, he had an idea. Amar lahu, so he said to the people of the town, Lo leisiv le'inishu shpiza. Nobody should give Rav Acha a place to sleep. Generally in the yeshiva, the people would sleep in town. He said, nobody should give him a place to sleep. I want him to go and have to sleep in the Beis Medrash. After the Misrafish Nisa. Because maybe then a nace of miracle will happen and this shade, this demon will be dealt with. Oh, so he went. Basbahu be Rabbanan. He did. He went and he slept. Rav Acha came. He had no place for the night. Nobody took him in. So he went to sleep in the Beis Medrash. Idmile kitanina de shiva rishuse. The demon appeared like a snake that had 7 heads. Very scary and dangerous. So Rav Acha davened. The great Rav Acha davened, and kol kriya dekara nasar chadreshe. Every time he would bow in his davening, another head would fall off until the point that he defeated this demon. Lemachar, the next day, Amar Lahu Lemachar, he told the people, then he told Abaye, he told the people the next day, Yigos Rafish Nisa Sakintin. If I didn't have this miracle performed for me, I would have been in grave danger. He was seemingly not so happy that they set him up for this, put him in this position. In the end, everything seemed to have worked out. And Hashem made a miracle for him, and he was saved from this demon. And he defeated the demon. Tamar Rabban and the rabbis taught, Lilmo Torah v'lisa isha. If a person has a choice of what to do first, to go learn Torah or to get married, Yilmo Torah v'achar kach yisa isha. He should go and learn Torah and then he should get married. V'im efshar lo b'lo isha. But if you won't be able to learn Torah without a wife, why wouldn't someone be able to learn Torah without a wife? So Rashi, I believe, says, actually it's not a Rashi, so seemingly because his mind would wander too much. So if he has a wife, it keeps him grounded. He has his wife, he has a woman to think about, he's not going to think about other women, other things. So if he can't learn properly without first getting married, he should get married and then go and learn Torah. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel. Rav Yehuda said in the name of Shmuel, Halacha no seisha v'achakach yom Torah. The halacha is is like the opinion that a person should first get married and then go learn Torah. Rabbi Yochanan Amar. Rabbi Yochanan said, Reichayim b'tzavaro v'yasuk b'Torah. He has a mill on his shoulders, on his neck, and he should go learn Torah. Meaning, How could he get married before he goes and sets aside time for Torah? If he gets married, starts to build a family, he has financial responsibilities. He's going to have to start operating the mill. He's going to have a mill on his, figuratively, a mill on his shoulders. So how could somebody do that? It's not going to work if he has such a burden, such responsibility on his shoulders. You have to first go learn Torah, then you get married. So, says the Gemara, V'lo pligi. It's not really a machlokes. One opinion said he should get married first, and then learn. The Rabbi Yochanan said, what do you mean? It was such a responsibility. How's he going to do it? He has to learn first, and then get married. Says the Gemara, they're not arguing. Halan v'halahu. This is for us, and this is for them. Meaning it depends where you live. If you live in Bavel, and you travel in Babylonia, and you travel to Eretz Yisrael to learn, so then you can get married first, and then travel to Eretz Yisrael to learn, because you're not going to have your responsibilities then, and you can learn properly. Those who do that, so they leave in the hands of the wife or other people to feed and fund the family. That was a practice of those days, and we have similar things nowadays. And they would, but in those days they would actually travel from Babel to Eretz Yisrael. Then they could learn without the burden of parnasa, of earning a livelihood. So if that's the case, then you can get married first. But for those who live in Eretz Yisrael and they're staying where they learn, they live where they learn, it's not going to work. They're not going to be able to if they're around and nobody is taking up the responsibility of the livelihood, of the parnasa instead of them, they're not going to be able to learn properly. So therefore, in Eretz Yisrael, they should first learn and then get married. That's what Rabbi Yochanan was saying. But those in Bavel can get married and then they can learn because they travel to Eretz Yisrael to learn. Says the Gemara, Mishtabach le'Rav Chisda le'Rav Huna bid Rav Hamnuna de Adam Gadol. Rav Chisda was praising Rav Hamnuna in front of Rav Huna and saying that Rav Hamnuna is a great man, a great Torah scholar, an Adam Gadol. Amar lei, so Rav Huna said, Kishayavo liyadcha haviyeu liyadi. When Rav Hamnuna comes to you, bring him to me. I want to meet this guy that you're saying is so great. Ki asa, when Rav Hamnuna came, chazya de lo pares sudra. Rav Huna saw that Rav Hamnuna wasn't wearing a kerchief on his head, a yarmulke. Now in those days, Rashi says that it was the practice, apparently not everybody wore a kippah. Those who were married wore one. So he asked him, Amar lei, my time lo prisa sudra. He said, why aren't you wearing, Rav Huna asked Rav Hamnuna, why aren't you wearing a kippah, a yarmulke? Amar lei, he said to him, to lo nasivna, because I didn't get married yet. Ahadrinu le'apei minei. Rav Huna, when hearing that response, he turned his face away from him. Amar lei, so Rav Huna said, Chazi de lo chazis lu la'api ad naspis. Make sure that you don't come and see me again until you get married. So Rav Huna was not happy that Rav Hamnuna was not married. Why? Says the Gemara, Rav Huna l'taimei. This was Rav Huna according to his reasoning. De Amar, who says, Ben esrim shana v'lo nasa isha kol yama ba'avera. If a person turns 20 and they haven't yet gotten married, they're going to have their whole life is going to be full of averos. Ba'averos al-Gadaitach, the Gemara says, really? You're going to be doing averos because they didn't get married? Elaima kol yama behir avera. Rather, no. They're going to spend their whole day thinking about averos. Thoughts of sins, of sinful immoral activity will enter their minds. In other words, when a person gets married, they become grounded. They don't have to think about other things. They don't have to think about other women. And Rav Huna held that once a person turns 20, if they haven't married yet, then that's going to leave an impact on them for the rest of their life. So even if they even if they end up getting married after that, the impact is still there. They spent however many years already, mature and having these thoughts. So that will have a impact on them. They're going to spend the rest of their life. Those thoughts will never go away unless they get married before they're 20. That grounds them and secures them. That was the opinion of Rav Huna, and that's why he was not happy that Rav Hamnuna came and he was not yet married. Amar Rava said, V'chein Tana Devei Rabbi Shmuel, and it was taught the same in the base measures of Rabbi Shmuel, Ad Chav Shana Yoshev HaKadosh Baruch Hu Mitzapeh L'Adam Masa Yisa Isha. Until a person turns 20, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God sits and he hopes, he waits for a person to get married. Kevan Shegiya Chaf V'lo Nasa. Once a person turns 20 and is not yet married, Omer Tipach Atzmosa. Hashem says his bones should turn to ash or something like that. Should burn up. It's he's made a terrible decision, the Gemara is saying, Rava is saying, by not getting married before the age of 20. Now obviously practice nowadays is different, but I guess the point is still there, and whatever a person does should be done with the rabbinic guidance, whatever age they choose to start looking for marriage. But definitely the Gemara held, in that time at least, that person should try to get married before they turn 20. We're going to see in the next Gemara next week that it was considered, very praiseworthy to get married even younger. We'll pick that up next week.